Hi, everybody. It is Katharine and Dave here from Fantasy Finishing, and we are just kind of going to run through some games field historical stats and sort of what it means looking at the semifinals field so far this year, who's in and who's not competing anymore, just that kind of stuff, because we did a bit of a post on Instagram where we highlighted like athletes that are no longer competing in this year. And it's just a bit surprising. So we thought we'd dig a little bit deeper into some of those sort of questions that we had about the games field year over year, looking at the past. So,
So yeah, I guess we dove into a bit last week, just trying to chip away the time between quarterfinals and semifinals. And so I guess what stuck out to us is that looking at athletes that aren't advancing to semifinals due to injury or retirement or choosing not to compete or suspension or other reasons not listed there. But on the women's side, I think we had, what was it, 15 athletes that competed at the 2021 games aren't moving on to semifinals. And on the men's side, 5. So was a big difference there, taking a look at that. So that was really the caveat and kind of the push to be, okay, this seems extreme that, 15 women aren't competing or definitely aren't advancing to the games this year. So like, what did that mean from previous years? So that really started us to dive into the data that way. And so we dove into it, looking just from 2011 onward, just kind of using that line in the sand that once the games got a bit settled. On the women's side, we saw that on average, about 51% of the field from the previous CrossFit Games repeats their attendance there. So generally about half the field will come over. At the highest, what we saw was, 68% of the previous year compete in 2017. So a lot of turnover that year. And with the lowest total being 38% back in 2011. So again, just kind of that formulation. So interesting from that standpoint that, if everybody made it who competed last year, we'd be at 65% going into 2022. Seems like a big drop off could potentially happen this year. So then on the men's side, looking again at those same numbers, on average, 46% of the games field repeats from previous years. So less than half. So larger turnover ratio than we see on the women's field. The highest repeat attendance was 56%. Again, in 2017, which is interesting, it is the same as the women's there, with the highest number of new athletes coming back in 2011, when only 35% of game athletes repeated. So it's interesting to see that, and again, on average, the men have a lower repeat attendance than the women do, but going into this year, only 5 men aren't going to or have bowed out of the competition so far to make it to Madison. So even though that they do have a higher turnover ratio so far going into semifinals, there's a lot more repeat attendance potential.
yeah, it's interesting that those are both the same years, but there's probably a transition in how the qualifying for the games went on those years.
Yeah, both the men and the max, because in 2017 was both their highest repeat rates for both men and women. So I don't know what was something with regionals. I don't know if they just did a whole bunch of games repeats from a programming standpoint, but something about that year made it easier to get back, I suppose.
Okay, so that's sort of looking at who's carrying forward year over year. But then we also thought we'd look at how many fresh faces kind of show up at the games each year, looking at how many rookies show up each year.
Yeah, so again, starting off with the women, on average, just shy of 16 rookies make it to the games each year. So on, I guess the highest number was again back in 2011 with 26, with the smallest amount being 7 athletes back in 2020, which kind of makes sense because there was a smaller field, or the smallest field that we've seen in the last 15 years. So, from that perspective, it makes sense. But again, 15 athletes or 16 athletes, when you're looking at a field of 40. So again, 40% of the field each year is averaging to be a rookie, which is interesting when, half the field repeats. So, it is tough competition. And then on the men's side, so slightly higher, so just higher than 16 fresh faces each year at the games. The highest number of rookies was back in 2011 with 27, and then the smallest number was 10. They had a couple years, so 10 both last year in 2021 as well as in 2020. So, I guess it was a bit tougher for kind of those athletes to make their first appearance in the games last year for them on the men's side of things.
Yeah, when you look at the trend, it's 100% on the men's side, but sort of generally on the women's too, is that it is tapering off. The number of new people showing up at the games every year is getting less, from 27 in 2011 to 10 the last 2 years. That is a significant number of fewer new people each year at the games. So it is a lot larger commitment of time and money to make it to the games now too.
Yeah, no, I guess that is an interesting trend, and I guess we should put the asterisks on 2019. We just took a look at the top 40 finishers as opposed to the entire field, but yeah, you're right. When you look at the men's field, it is just a gentle slope downwards. Like there's no spike back up or any correction. It's just each year lower and lower. The number of rookies gets down. So that definitely could be, to your point, that being a professional CrossFitter takes a lot of time and effort and 100% dedication that makes it a lot harder to break into the scene.
Yeah, for sure. And then another thing we thought was just fun because we had the data pulled is looking at the number of athletes that have like multiple years at the games, like people that have been at the games once or versus people who've been at the games 6 times.
Yeah, so looking at the women's side, and we took across anybody who finished a CrossFit Games, or at least started at that. There was 405 women that we did have within our records, and without a surprise, 285 of them only competed in 1 year. So greater than 50% are kind of a one and done scenario. And then it starts to drop off quite rapidly. So you got, only 56 were able to make it 2 years, 3 times games appearances, 22, 4 years, 15, 5 years, 8, and then 6 plus, just to put that block in there, is 19. So when you're looking at, 19 athletes, it's about 0.5% of all games athletes ever have been able to make it back 6 times. So, it just kind of shows that once you make it to the top, it's hard to be unseated. And then, on the men's side, so we have 470 athletes that have made an appearance at the CrossFit Games. 322 of them were just kind of a one and done. And then again, that trend continues to decrease with, 68 being 2 appearances, 28, 3, 19 athletes have been 4. Again, the 5-year athletes are 5, and then 6 plus years is 21. So, that, considering the number of athletes that make it to the games, that the number that are perennial are quite small. And then, it makes sense when you kind of just look at the games field. You can, rattle off Brent Fikowski and a Noah Olson and a Cole Sager and a Patrick Vellner and a BKG and a Koski, who, you do have those, long-term, runs, which again, when you're looking at a field of 40, that's 15% of the field right there, just guys who just go every year without even thinking about it. So again, it's tough. It just shows how tough it is to make it into the scene and just stay there.
Yeah, it's impressive that those athletes have been there that many years. But yes, it is a very small percentage of the games field, which is kind of sort of why we're doing what we're doing, of let people know who athletes are, because there is a lot of coming and going in every game season of who's in and who's out. All right, those stats are all kind of looking backwards at past games years, and then we thought we would sort of pull it forward to what's happening so far this year.
Yeah, so I guess what it is interesting to see that, at least on the women's side of the field, we are, at that 65% potential repeat. So there is a lot of people who are, on the outside looking in, and there is a lot of potential for fresh faces, I should say, certainly on the women's side. But from a rookie standpoint, looking at the fields and the athletes left competing, of the 300 competitors that we're going to be seeing at semifinals, on the women's side, 53 of them have past games experience. So I guess, what is that, like 17, 18% of the field have made a trip to the games before as an individual athlete. And then on the men's side, actually jumps up even higher. So 68 of the 300 men competing have past games experience as well. So, what is that, 23%? So, it's tough as a rookie to break into the field even more. So I guess, again, those declining rates just show these athletes are just staying in the game longer, staying at that level of competitiveness that, when there's 40 game spots available and there's, 53 women and 68 men who have competed at the games, there's a lot of room for disappointment from those past games athletes. Even if you assume they're all going to make it, that's 13 past games athletes or female past games athletes that aren't going to make it, and at least 28 on the men's side.
Yeah, that's a bit crazy. And then also, like, when you do look at a lot of the games athletes, a lot of them have a gap year, sort of where they didn't make the games, which is kind of being explained by this of, like, there are literally more games athletes than there are spots at the games for people to make it continuously every year.
Yeah. Yeah, like, just, quickly looking through the list, like, you got, the poor Oceania women, like, there's 6 games athletes for 3 spots left. It's, you can fill double the spots. So when you have, at least 2 of those could be top 25 athletes competing at the last chance qualifier, it's tough to make it to the games. Like, it's, it's hard to compete at that level. And, I think it's probably underestimated how hard it is to make it to the games once you're at that level.
Yeah. No, it's kind of interesting to see. It just makes the semifinals kind of a bit more interesting now. Like, really seeing that there are that many games athletes coming out of certain areas.
Yeah, definitely. So it'll be interesting to watch, especially now that we're seeing, as of today, or April 11th, this recording, that people are being slotted into their semifinals. So we'll be able to look at this a bit more and see which semifinals in, a theoretical sense, got the easier draw from past performances than other ones. But like, there's 31 North American men still compete, or who have been to the games, still competing for 20 game spots. It'll be an interesting season, to our semifinal season, to watch, especially with a little bit more context on how many elite level contenders there are.
Yeah, and given that there was 10 male rookies at the games the past 2 years of the games, and one of those was a smaller field, with it being 2020. So, yeah, there are going to be lots of names that we all know that are not going to go to the games this year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's our kind of look back at games field sort of breakdowns, and then what it could mean for moving forward this season. And I think the next podcast we're going to do is kind of going to be looking at the strengths of those semifinal fields.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure to sign up for your free account on fantasyfitnessing.com. We'll send out some emails once we get closer to semifinals and the kickoff of our free fantasy CrossFit Games there. And then, as always, follow us on Instagram at fantasyfitnessing.
All right. Take care, guys.